Hello, welcome, thanks for joining me today. Today I'm going to share with you an awesome little split toning hack that can really boost your creative flair when editing your photos in Adobe Lightroom. So if you're not familiar with split toning is an old school practice that's come out of the darkroom, and it allows the photographer to add colour to either the highlights or the shadows of a photograph to give it a certain look or feel. In modern times, this process has become available in most photo editing softwares such as Lightroom. A while ago, Lightroom had a dedicated split toning panel that allowed the user to add a certain colour to either the shadows or highlights. But in truth, it was quite basic in terms of what it could actually do. Recently, Adobe replaced the split toning panel with a new colour grading panel, which is essentially the same thing, but now it's presented in the form of wheels. They also added in a mid-tones section too. Now, while I think the colour grading panel is pretty cool, it doesn't let the user have full control over where that particular colour is applied. For example, if you wanted to apply a blue tone to the shadows, that blue tone will be applied to all of the shadows. And for me, this just doesn't really offer enough flexibility. Maybe I only want the blue tint to be added to the shadows on the left-hand side of the image and not the right, for example. Well, there is another way. A way that not only allows the user to add colour to the shadows, midtones and highlights, but also allows the user to selectively mask those areas too and apply many other adjustments too. Before we get on to this episode, if you can hear some squeaking in the background, I do apologise. We've just had 9 baby quail hatch out. We've been hatching some quail. We've always wanted to keep some, and my kids are really inspired by our recent hens that we bought, so we thought we'd get some quail too, why not? And yeah, 9 hatched over the weekend, and they're super cute, they really are. But one of them in particular is incredibly noisy, so apologies if you can hear some cheeping in the background, but it's all good fun, isn't it? Anyway, in Lightroom here, I've got a couple of images I'm going to be working on with this split toning method. Now, one thing I should say is, there's many rules in photography, and split toning, there's a few that you could follow as well. One of those is to make sure your colours that you're splitting are opposite each other on the colour wheel. Now, this is not you don't have to follow this rule by any stretch of the imagination, but it's something that you might think about perhaps if you're just getting into it, and it's certainly a good place to start. And we can see the colour wheels here in the colour grading section. You can see where the colours are opposite each other on the colour wheel. These are called complementary colours. So a classic is your teal and orange, if you like. So here we can see that the teal colours sit opposite the orange colours. And it works for green and magenta as well. So these are called complementary colours. So if you're ever getting stuck and you want to figure out where your complementary colours sit, just look at these wheels and just draw a line straight through the centre. So I spoke a little bit before about how you can control shadows, highlights and midtones with these wheels. But yeah, they are a bit limiting. Let's dive into my method for split toning this image for a really creative, flexible edit. Firstly, what we're going to do is make this image a little bit smaller on the screen, and you'll see why I do that in a second. So I'm going to press Control and minus on the keyboard just to make it a little bit smaller. We'll enlarge it again in a minute. And then what we're going to do is grab our adjustments brush, and you'll see here that my brush is huge, and if you look at the size, it's 100. So as you can see, when I click on my image here, the adjustment brush is covering the whole of the image. So if we press O on the keyboard, that orange layer there is showing us everything that's painted within that image. Now I'm going to click Done here, and now I'm going to grab my brush again, and I'm going to do exactly the same thing, but I'm going to just make it a little bit towards the right. And as you can see, I pressed O again on the keyboard, and that's showing us where we're painting. So everything within the image is covered. If we come down to range mask, I'm going to click on luminance here, and then I'm going to go back to my other one and click on luminance again. So both of these have got a luminance mask attached to them now. Now, the one on the left is going to be our shadows, and the one on the right is going to be our highlights. So everything that we attach to the left-hand one is going to be the shadows, everything on the right-hand one highlights, and this kind of matches up how we see the histogram, how we see curves. We always have our blacks and darks on the left and our highlights or whites on the right hand side. So I'm going to try to keep that here as well. So first of all, I'm going to go back and press Ctrl+ on the keyboard to make our image bigger. Now the next thing I'm going to do is come down to the picker tool down here and click on a shadow area. So I'm going to click on here. See now how that's changed our range mask here. Essentially everything between these 2 points falls within the shadows. Now if I press O on my keyboard, you can see now where that area that's painted in by the brush is being affected. You can see all this left hand side here, all these darker areas. They're being affected by the brush now, where everything on the highlight side of things is not being affected by the brush. So what I can do now is come up to this little tab here called Colour, and this is where we can get really creative. We can click on an area here in the blues, somewhere around about perhaps here, and you can see that's added in a blue area to the shadows. If I just click off that, you can see how that's changing that blue darker area here in the left hand side, but it's not really affecting the white highlights too much. Now if we find that it's affecting areas of the image that we don't wish to be affected, we can adjust the smoothness. So if I press O on my keyboard again, we can see where we've painted. Now if I bring this across, you can see how it starts to only affect the very dark areas, and again the further I come down with that, you can see how harsher it is, that transition between the dark areas and the light. Again, if I move across, you'll start to see that spread out again. So playing around with the smoothness is a great way of really dialing in where you want this tone to be placed. Again here with my range, everything within this area here is my shadows, but you can see on the right hand side just here we're getting more towards the mid-tones. So if I wanted that just to affect only the very darkest areas, I could dial that back a little bit more. Again, if I press O, you'll see it's only affecting the shadows. The further I bring that into the center, the more it's starting to affect the mid-tones. So I'm going to keep this dialed in around about here somewhere. I think it looks pretty good for now. So this is added in some blue to my shadows. We're going to come back and tweak this again in a minute, but next I'm going to click Done and come up to my adjustment brush again and click on my highlights layer, the one on the right. So now I'm going to click on my picker, my range selector here, and click on the highlights. And as you can see, this has done the opposite now. It's made a range mask here on the very right hand side. So essentially if I click O on my keyboard, you can see that it's only this right hand side that's being affected. Now I can go back up to my colour and choose an orangey colour to warm those highlights up. So let's click in here somewhere. As you can see now, that really has started to warm those highlights up. I want to make this is, this is sunrise, so I want to keep it in keeping with that feel. Somewhere probably around there looks good. Let's just close that a minute. So if I dial this off now, turn off the adjustment brush, now you can see where we've come from and now where we are. We've got that lovely warm glowing mist, and then in the dark shadows here we've got this cooler tone. So we've got this lovely transition between the warm highlights and the cooler shadow area. Now if we come back up to the colour, we can see this slider here. Now you can see if we dial that back, essentially that's taking away that colour, it's desaturating that colour. So we can add in as much colour as we want. Just by bringing that up and down, you can see how that's affecting that actual colour there. So we can dial in as much of that colour, that intensity of that colour as we wish. One thing that's great about these adjustment brushes as well is obviously we can be really selective. We can paint away some of that mask as well. So again, we're here on this highlight brush, and say for example we want to take away some of this warmer tones in the tree here. All we need to do is press, let me get rid of my range mask selector. All we need to do is press Alt on the keyboard, and that's going to bring our negative brush up, and this essentially allows us to paint away that mask. So if I come around here, you'll see now that those warmer tones are going back out of that area. So we've painted away those warmer tones in that area. I don't think I want to do that, but again, with our blues, we could maybe paint away some of this area here. Perhaps there's some blue creeping into this, and because this is a warmer side and this is catching that warm light, maybe we could paint away any blue that might be creeping into those shadows there. So that's just painting that mask away there. So as you can see, there's definitely none of those shadow areas being affected there. Again, perhaps there's some in the trunk of this tree as well, and we perhaps don't want to see any of that blue creeping into the shadows there. So again, we can just paint that away, and you can really see there that where I've perhaps overdone it, and the transition between the warmer and the cooler tones is too much. So you can see how you can be really selective in terms of how you're dealing with your colour when you're doing this. Now, another great thing as well is not only do we have access to the colour, we also have access to all of these other settings as well. So we could play around with our temperature as well, our tint and our hue as well. We also can control the saturation in those areas and all of these other settings. So not only does it allow us to split tone, it allows us to be really creative with all of these other effects as well. So let's have a look at another image now, and this is a classic example where we can use split toning to actually correct the colours in our image as opposed to use it for a creative effect. So again, I've got a nice misty morning shot here. I do love my misty mornings. I'm going to put my first brush in here, add my luminance range mask to it, click done, grab another brush, add my luminance range mask to it. So again, we're using the same principle. The shadow is going to be on the left, highlights on the right. So you can see this image is very blue, and it's pre-sunrise, and that's why it's quite blue. It came out quite blue, but I want to correct that. I want to make some of the highlights in this image a bit warmer. So that's what we're going to do. And I come up to colour, and I'm going to set that to orange, somewhere around about there. Now, as you can see, that's applying it to all of the image, and it looks pretty horrible, to be honest. But I'm going to get my range mask selector and just click on the clouds there. And as you can see, it's moved the luminance mask there over to the right hand side. So this is a great way of allowing us to just control the highlights within this image. Now I can go ahead and warm these up as well a little bit more with the temperature slider, perhaps even increase the exposure a little bit, maybe increase this, bringing it in a bit more into the mid-tones as well, just warming up those mid-tones as well. Let's press O on the keyboard to see what's being affected. Now we can play around with the smoothness slider. So now we can think about maybe adjusting our shadows. Now we're done with that one. So let's click back on our shadows button. Now we can grab our range mask selector, and I'm probably going to come and click on this tree here. And now obviously it's still looking quite blue, but you know, it was a sort of bluish hour shot. Let's have a little play around with colour, see if we can get it looking a little bit more natural. Perhaps somewhere there, and then just pull that back a little bit. So it's starting to look a little bit more green now as opposed to blue. Still got some of those blue hues down here. And that's starting to look a lot more natural now just by introducing a few clicks. Let's press backslash on our keyboard, and we can see the before and the after. So quite dramatic effects there with just using the range mask. As you can see, you can get super creative with just a few tweaks with this range mask, and you can really express your creative freedom with it. Just bear in mind that you can paint away any of that mask by hitting Alt on your keyboard and just painting that mask away, and that's why it's such a powerful tool, something that you can't do in the HSL and also the colour grading panel. Split toning can really open up many possibilities for adding, you know, a little sparkle to your photos, or you know, if you want to add a certain style to a look of, you know, to a selection of images, that can really help too. I do hope you enjoyed this little video, hope it's helped you out. If you do, please be sure to share it with other people and subscribe for future content. But before I go, please take a minute or two just to take a look at this selection of abstract images from the Photography Club's February challenge. I hope you enjoyed those images. Every month we have a monthly challenge over in the Photography Club. So if you fancy taking part, please be sure to check out the Photography Club for more information. Once again, thanks everybody for watching. Take care and I'll see you next week.